And welcome back. Thanks for rejoining us. We have now been joined on set this morning by our friends of conservation and development. We have been privileged to have in our company this morning Raphael Manzanero. Good morning.
Thank you very much.
Mr.
Good morning.
Manzanero.
Good morning.
Let's begin by getting an overview of what's taking place in the Chiqibull as we speak. And then we're going to reference that against what's taking place across in Guatemala.
Yeah, as how you will know, the Chiqibull forest always has a set of challenges and issues. I would say that at this particular stage in time, we still maintain, three main areas that are of particular threat and challenges to the Chiqibull forest. The first one being the gold panning activity. We still have not been able to contain the illegal gold panning activities, and this has been going on for the last 6 years now. The other issue is, of course, the agricultural farming. At this point in time, however, we have not really detected a lot of forest fires as such along the western border. On the map that you can see there, it was basically satellite imagery along with documenting what was the human footprint as over the years up until 2016. So this has been going on from 1984 to 2016, a cumulative area that has already been fragmented by Guatemalans, in this case in the Chiqibull forest. Until today, in terms of this current year, and I think because of the wet season that was extended, it doesn't seem to us that the Guatemalans had a lot of opportunity of cutting and hacking the forest as in other years. But we are still vigilant because the dry weather is now on, and so we will only be able to forecast and be able to project in terms of what could happen in the next couple of weeks, which possibly, if there is the continuation of the dry weather, then of course we will see more of the human activity in terms of agricultural farming. The third activity is cattle ranching. We have been reporting here over the last year and a half or so in terms of that movement of cattle along the western border, and certainly that has not also stopped. We think that is an evolving trend as how we have been informing over the months. We still feel that we would have to be more assertive in terms of addressing those particular activities.
Now, I was lucky to have been able to visit once again the Chiqibull last Thursday, and I must say it's a magnificent area of the country for one to visit. The flora and the fauna, the expanse of green and the rolling hills, etc. I could go on and on about it, but I've also had the privilege of flying over the Chiqibull and the border area as well. And when you look at the despoliation of forest cover comparatively between Guatemala on one side of the border and Belize on the other side of the border, it's a comparison that we would say is night and day. You see the lush green on our end, and you see dry, arid land on the other. It has been completely deforested. But you also look at scale. The Chiqibull is so large and expansive that the FCD alone and the BDF patrols and the outposts and everything can't completely stop and deter the incursions. What efforts are being made? What continued efforts are being made to try to keep this area of our country as encroachment free, if I may?
Well, I am not so sure if we'll ever really be able to have a zero incursion rate, within the borders. It is a common, denominator that all countries do have their level of incursions. I mean, Guatemala has from Mexico, quite big incursions in terms of drug lords and operations ongoing with drugs, planes and so. In the Maya Biosphere Reserve, for example. So in the case of Belize, I think we have always been, noting that what we have wanted to do is to contain, as best as we can, the illicit activities. So we certainly believe that it is going to be an ongoing challenge, particularly which is highly important to note, that as the population in Guatemala increases, then certainly we will have even much more tensions along that western border. And because we have all the natural resources, like what you noted, in terms of the land, in terms of the forest, in terms of the fish, in terms of the mammals, in terms of the firewood, I mean, you name it, you have everything there. That, of course, a local community like across in Guatemala would love to have. And that's what they have been seeking over the many years. So how do we contain that? We believe, and we have always said it also, that in order to govern a country, in order to govern a land, you need a presence. If you don't have a presence, then you cannot govern a land.
Yeah.
So governance really comes with having an institutional presence on the ground. And in this case, mindful, we are not talking of putting a village. We are not talking of putting a community. Although I know some people have noted of, well, let's go and put in, villages along the western border, to be able to contain the incursions. Well, that is not really the solution. We see it right along Bully Tree. We see it around Benque Viejo del Carmen. That is even a collusion between Belizeans and Guatemalans in terms of the movement of the human footprint. So what we are saying is that we need really to have a management presence on the ground, and that is what we try to do as best as we can.
Can I dig a little bit beyond? Because where we are is that on Sunday, the Guatemalan government, as you are aware of, the Guatemalan people, country, voted in favor of going to the ICJ. And part of the narrative behind yes going to the ICJ is because there will be certainty, because they're saying that our border disappeared. And so my question is a more practical one. Is there any confusion on the ground that you encounter? That Guatemalan somehow, I don't know, I'm in Belize, or where is the border? Or is there some certainty that they know where they are and they know that what they're doing wrong?
I think to a large extent, people would know where it is in terms of that line, in terms of the borderline. In fact, as you noted, if you go over in terms of an aerial reconnaissance or satellite imagery, you can see that there is a line. Basically can see it because the farmers have traditionally been able to operate until a particular zone. But over the years, they started to creep in. So I must say that to a large extent, the people would know. And I think the confusion would have been, probably as the population has been increasing, as more people have been moving from other places. I mean, in Guatemala, there's a lot of local migration. You will find people from Izabal, you will find people from the Alta Vera Pass that are coming down into Petén. So they arrive into these communities, into these rural areas, and they might not really, historically, they would not really know where this line might be in terms of the western border. But to a large extent, the people do know, and in fact, it's amazing some of the satellite images that we have and some of the photos. I mean, you will see that the fence is right there along that line.
The fence.
The fence. The only problem is that once we don't have a presence, then they take advantage of then moving in farther, because they might tend to believe that if they have reached to this point, then they basically can go farther. So I think, I would say that to a large extent, they would know. Although, having said that, many of the communities that we work with our Guatemalan counterparts, such as La Rejoya, such as El Carrizal, such as Monte Los Olivos, which are communities right there, half a kilometer or so along the western border, or even much more closer. Some of these communities have come in, and they have wanted, they have requested that they would want really to have a line which is really much more visible. In fact, they have even asked authorities here in Belize, they have asked us even at FCD if we can go in and just be able to really clean off a space that then they really can see in terms of the difference. Although, of course, it is not really that simple as how you will reckon. But the same communities have asked really for them only to ensure that then there will not be that high level of trespassing as such.
Do you think that a decision from a court reaffirming our borders would lessen or positively affect the work that you and your organization have to do on the ground?
I would actually refer to one factor which is only an assumption for me at this stage. The assumption would be that once there is an official or a doctrine that is very, very much cemented as such. I mean, not amongst us, because we know it. I mean, we know where the western border is in terms of the population across. If the principle has been in Guatemala that they do not really acknowledge and accept that there is that western border, then I can only assume that having it under that legal context, then the government will want to dissuade their citizens. At this stage, it doesn't seem to me that they are dissuading. Why? Because if they dissuade, in a way, it is like already accepting that yes, there is a western border. So my only hope in, if we were to go that route is that then it can be able, hopefully, to reduce it, but that will not really stop it. And and so we still would require that institutional presence. We still believe that we need really to provide, agencies on the ground, operational activities, patrols, because once again, I mean, the people across the border, they are, I mean, not described as people who are at a level of poverty. They are considered to be at a extreme level of poverty.
Wow.
And so they are basically seeking the resources that we have. And so if you leave it open, then certainly they will take it for grabs.
So let me ask you this. A road has been proposed to be built and paved all the way to Caracol, which is pretty much grants access to Chiqibull direct. What are the benefits and the drawbacks of creating this kind of an access in your mind when you look at how close Caracol is to the border?
We actually, as environmentalists, we have an area. If you have an ecosystem such as the Chiqibull forest, I mean, to a large extent, the problems that one faces is really a human dimension. Once the human dimension is uncontrolled and is not well managed. So in the case of us, I mean, today, over the last 11 years, as FCD on the ground, what we have been concentrating our efforts is on the buffer zone. The buffer zone being on the western border. As you mentioned now, the drive of a road, of a highway into Caracol, we are now looking at our other buffers, not on the western border. We are looking internal now to Belize. And that is already posing a couple of challenges for us. Again, I can tell you that from our own principles of management, we are now starting now to eye not only on the western border, but now we are looking at the mountain pine ridge, the Baca Forest Reserve, where there will be, and already there are some movements and trends of people that will be actually moving in, much more closer to these, the more virgin ecosystems. And so you bet, a highway in a way, if
it brings development and it brings migration, internal, in this case, inner migration of people who will be living on either side of that stretch of road.
Exactly.
You mentioned earlier a number, I think they were villages or communities. But my question was, as we look at these communities, San Marcos, Las Flores, the Chiqibull, which are on the Guatemalan side, and you told us that some of the people who come here are indigently poor. Are there any agencies equivalent to the FCD, to forestry, who are present by the Guatemalan government there to sort of, not to stop them, because as you said, that would be some recognition, but to, at least to monitor what's going on?
Yeah, what we have done
on the Guatemalan side,
since 2008, when we started to operate in the Chiqibull more under a program with a management plan, we developed a component which is on binational relations. So yes, we do have formidable groups in Guatemala, in the Petén area, that have been working with us. The strategies are very different, and that is how it has to be. For example, as we do the work of enforcement and monitoring here in Belize, on their side they are looking at sustainable livelihoods. So there is a seed fund that was opened in these Guatemalan communities in order for them really to provide them an alternative means of generating a local economy, which is more legal, where they can do their own shutting on their plantations, they can do their agroecological farming methods. And so that has been even supported by the European Union over the years. With Association Balam, I think we have done a good work over the last, I would say more recently, over the last 4 years in terms of providing those seed funds to these communities. It is possible, and we believe that that component has been one of the drivers, only one of the drivers in terms of reducing the level of incursions over the most recent years. The people from Monte Los Olivos, the people from La Rejoya, we have not been seeing now those bigger numbers of people coming into Belizean territory. The problem, however, is that there are more communities. If you see on the map, there are many communities. It is not only 6, it's not only 11, there's over 40. So these populations are increasing, and so the question becomes, to what extent can we really be able to provide, those seed funds really to work with these communities. We would hope that international attention can be brought also across into this kind of territory, along with the Guatemalan government, of course, because it is really sort of a food security issue that is occurring right along the western border. It is not, I think the people on the ground, at least on the by La Rejoya and Monte Los Olivos, which traditionally have been about 11 communities, which are really the main hotspots. There's another 40 or so communities, but the main ones are basically about 11 of them. And these communities, they are basically more from hand to mouth. So they are really more in a mode of survival more than anything else.
What I believe is lost upon a number of Belizeans, I don't want to say a majority because then that would be something else, but what I believe is lost upon a number of Belizeans is how we are directly affected, adversely affected by incursions in the Chiqibull. I recall having done the flyover with FCD and looking at what takes place in certain areas of the Chiqibull that affects, for instance, the headwaters, and the fact that mining and other activities we have seepage and that sort of stuff, and that comes down into the Macal River, and that's the water that we drink, etc., etc. I think I wasn't aware of that. And I'm thinking perhaps people who don't get that opportunity to go in there and see how it all works from an ecological perspective are lost on that. Can you explain that once again or reiterate to those of us who already know?
The challenge for us has always been, even though we have been invited, and thanks to Channel 5, we have been quite often here, and although we try as best as possible, even with imagery, but you can never be able really to feel unless you are really there. And of course, we recognize that a lot of people won't be able to go into Chiqibull. These areas are really distant, they are rugged terrain.
Not for the faint of
heart. So it's really difficult, and so to bring the story home has always been difficult. But nevertheless, the headwaters is really one of the most critical things. It's very difficult for the people from Belize City, for example, to understand that that water, well, whenever we open the tap, it's fresh and it's cool, but you don't know from where really original is coming. But that water is coming a way distant from these headwaters from the Chiqibull jungles. But first it crosses through Guatemala, which is the interesting part. And then it comes back again to Belize and ends up right here in the Caribbean Sea. So, and what we have noticed, and I believe that the way that the gold panning activity is occurring, sometimes I believe that the Guatemalans will stop gold panning in the Ceibo Chico area, in the southern part of Chiqibull, until the gold is finished. So, but by then and up until now, the sedimentation, the erosion, the garbage, the fecal matter, the urine, everything that is going in there, at some stage we already have started to document that there are more microbes that are already taking place. So the stability of that system is no longer the same like in other years. If we leave it to continue on and on, then certainly then you will see the impact. So it's very hard though, because you don't see it right now. I mean, you see your water, but of course it's chlorinated whatsoever. But in more closer to those headwaters, it's already impacting a lot the level of, and then it's a domino effect as well. You know, once you have humans inside of an area, then of course you have more debris. You create forest fires. You do, you know, looting. You do hunting. You do poaching, and so it brings many other things along with that.
You said the river comes out of Belize, the headwaters.
Yeah.
You're frightening me, actually. Comes out of Belize, it goes through Guatemala and comes back to Belize.
Yeah.
The controls in Guatemala are a little more relaxed. I'm trying to put it the most diplomatic way I can in terms of the way they monitor, and because of the poverty that's there, the monitoring cannot be the same. They cannot be babying it up and letting the grass grow. People are hungry.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this from the standpoint of a very nasty possibility. Let's say we were to go to court and we lose. A large part of the area, which is the Chiqibull, is the area we would lose to Guatemala. What would be the impact on the remaining portion of Belize that we would be able to keep?
Well, you know, I mean, the natural resources, you know, is one, of course. The land is really the most precious element that any humans can have. So, but the water, if we look at the water, in fact, you know, one of the key things I have believed over the years is that one of the main elements that probably would be able to keep us more as neighbors in peace would have been because of the water resources. Guatemala provides water to El Salvador, to Honduras, and to Mexico. If there is one place that Guatemala depends on in terms on its eastern side, it's basically from Belize because of the water resources. Yeah, I mean, you had noted that whenever you fly over and you look across the border into Guatemala, you will see that, and that was the Chiqibull Maya Mountains Biosphere Reserve. It's a reserve as such, but it's finished. So the rivers, the water, the element that is coming out that really gives it that value now to those lands in Petén, southern Petén, you know, it's not the forest, it's not the wildlife, it's not the scarlet macaw, it is the water that is coming from Belize. Now, mindful that Guatemala has been extremely I would say agile to note that even the water that they are providing down to other republics, to Mexico, to El Salvador and Honduras, they have wanted now to charge fees for water. They probably will not go into an international arena to look at negotiation for water. Water is, as how you will know, and I've always said this, perhaps I need to emphasize it, but in the Chiqibull, at the end of the day, yes, you see the trees. Yes, you see the scarlet macaws. And yes, you can see the gold. But the most precious element that we have as a country is the water.
It's the most invaluable
and the water
resource.
in Guatemala, 90% of its rivers and more are contaminated already.
Wow.
There are rivers in Petén that have closed down already.
So this claim against Belize could be by Guatemala, could be from one angle a push by Guatemala to get water security and probably a water economy by saying, listen, because the claim, if I was looking at the map just now in terms of the Chiqibull area and the area being clean, and if you're telling me that one of the last uncontaminated or less contaminated water sources is in fact the channels that run through the Chiqibull.
You know, we have a binational alliance that we created, which is the binational Belize watershed program, because our formula is as follows. You know, we have felt that Guatemalans will feel along these communities, San Marcos, Esmeralda, Monte Los Olivos, San Jose Las Flores, all of these communities, they depend on the water that is coming from Belize. You see it here, this is the headwaters. It's coming down. And so we felt that's strategically for us to be able to join efforts is because of the water. And as a consequence of that message, we are saying, guys, if you destroy our forests, you are destroying the water resources that is providing you that element of survival across your communities. So water is probably one of that element that joins us.
But then what if they say, listen, I am tired of having to go over this border to get it. I'm just going to claim it. Then I can do with it what I want. As opposed to having to depend on Mr. Manzanero and having soldiers look at me. And then I could probably even sell water to Belize.
I think it's a point that it is, the way how you describe it is logical. I think that, resources, once again, and we are talking about a holistic resource. The Chiqibull forest also, and if you go down south, the greater Chiqibull Maya Mountains. If you can imagine that, that is part of the greatest portion of forest that is left, north of the Amazon.
Wow.
So even at a regional context, these things are of high value. even though probably, once again, Belizeans might not be able to see it like that. We did a study in terms of the trees that are standing in the Chiqibull jungles. This we did about 7 years ago. The value that even the carbon stocks have in the Chiqibull, Caracol area and all of that zone, Chiqibull, the preliminary assessment was that we would have, as a country, we have nearly $2 billion out of carbon stocks.
Wow.
It's not with an M, it's with a B.
Yeah.
So these things are, these resources, what you see, is not things that other countries have. El Salvador barely have any forests. Guatemala, the population is increasing. So these resources become much more valuable. That's why many Guatemalans are still flocking to Belize, because there's still the land there available. So I think that you have to see it from a more holistic level in terms of what really is the richness of such an ecosystem. For us, we see it, for us as environmentalists, we see it, those are the resources that makes a country as valuable as how it is.
Can I ask one final question from me before, because I know we're running out of time. But in terms of, we're going into a process. Guatemala has voted yes to go to the ICJ. Belize is going to go into a process. There's a possibility that we might see increased activity at the border and in the reserve. Because they're watching the television, they're hearing their politicians say there is no border, we're going to court to see where the border is. And in that state of declared flux on that side, the temptation might be for somebody who is indigently poor to come over and get a couple extra hikite and a couple extra give nuts. Are we prepared? And is there an increased strategy involving the FCD, involving all the agencies, to preempt, to be prepared for any mischief or any increased activity because of what is going on politically between the two countries?
That's a very good question. I would expect that the agencies of government have also been looking at all of these results. I know that Ambassador Alexis Rosado, who was just recently here on the show just a couple of minutes ago, we have been discussing on what might be now in terms of the other steps that we will have to follow. We have contacted our Guatemalan counterparts at the NGO level, of course. There was a feeling on one camp saying that if Guatemalans have voted for a yes, there could be a high or a number of Guatemalans who might think that by saying a yes, it's like, the territory is ours along the western border. So the only thing I can say here is that we are increasing now our vigilance. We will be more alert. We will bring the numbers. We are going to look at the trends if that is so. I cannot really tell at this point in time. We have just recently finalized a binational environmental security action plan, or strategy, that we basically have been developing over the couple of months ago. It's finished now. and that outlines the level of enforcement that is required and monitoring on the ground, and what also our Guatemalan counterparts would do across their border. We would only change in terms of the formula is really to work much more in higher level of coordination with the agencies of government, because as an NGO, that is really our duty to do. And we are basically availed, of course, really to see how we can define more further strategies, based upon what we can get to see on the ground. So that's as much as I would say.
Well, thanks for having joined us this morning. It's a continuation of an ongoing conversation that we're having on the Guatemala issue from various fronts. And it's a pleasure to have gotten the opportunity for you to shed light on what's taking place on the ground near the border areas. We're going to take a commercial break, and when we return, it's to discuss the Expo Fair that is coming up this Friday in Orange Walk at the IT VEC.